I greet you all once again in the wonderful name of my Lord Jesus Christ. And happy Sabbath to you all. So I'd like to thank Pastor Solomon for inviting me to participate in this important convention. And I really feel privileged to come and be with you here to also learn from the other speakers. And I always say that when you are asked to come and present, it's an opportunity for you to even learn more about the very subject that you're presenting. So what I'm going to present to you now, there are some things also that I've learned that I hope that at the end of this convention, I will do differently. So be rest assured that we're in this journey together. I've been asked to speak about minding your brain. As you know, essentially this weekend, we're just focusing on the brain. We're looking at this tiny little organ. It's tiny in relation to your whole body, but very, very powerful, extremely powerful. It has to be alive for you to be alive. When it dies, you die. That's how powerful it is. You can do without your limbs, you can do without your arms, you can survive without an ear, but when we determine whether you are still alive or not, we look at whether you are brain dead or not. I'm sure we all know that. And it's so important that it's one thing that doctors would always try to keep alive. So they'll put you on machines to make sure that you are alive, and when they see that, you know what, this brain is not coming back, they'll tell you, this person is brain dead. Do you want us to continue putting him on a machine? Have we heard those stories? Yes, because when the brain is messed up, everything is messed up. So it's one of the reasons why we want to talk about the brain this weekend. But moreover, it's a very, very powerful organ that shapes almost everything that we do. And it shapes the people that we are. And it's an organ that can allow us to make changes that we want in our lives, whether in terms of personality, in relationships, in finding God, in relating better with God. The brain is one organ that we have the ability to train and change in order to achieve what you want. So, as you know, I'm sure you've seen the brain before, am I right? In real life? Wait, in pictures? Okay. I was just checking if you're still with me. So this is the brain. Some of us have seen it in real life. Some people have seen the brain of, is it a sheep or a cow? Is it a sheep? Some people eat brain, eh? I've seen them. Okay, so the brain is made of many cells. These cells are called neurons. I'm sure most of what I'm going to present is what has been said earlier by the earlier presenter. I'm still going to repeat it to emphasize its importance so that you can also understand where it fits in terms of emotional trauma and emotional healing. So the brain is made of neurons, many, many neurons. That is just a typical picture of what a neuron looks like. So these neurons, as you can see on one end and the other end, there's millions of them which come together to make sense or to put together information. So if, for instance, I am speaking and I am saying to you, good morning, and I'm looking at you, a lot of things happen before that happens. I have to look, the information goes through my eyes, it goes through my brains, it tells my brains, these are people, remember I have to greet, then the brain, puts that information together and it says, no, you have to speak in English. We know that you are Zulu, but this time speak in English, and then it puts together that greeting. So by the time I say good morning, a lot has happened. And those things are done by these neurons. So these neurons do a lot of connections together, which we call them synapses, as he was explaining earlier. And it's those connections that we're talking about that we say have a lot to do with who we are. So what we knew previously about the brain is that brain functions are not strictly confined to, brain functions are strictly confined to specific locations, but we know that they are not, okay? Brain functions were confined to specific locations of the brain. That's what we used to think before. As we age, the connections in the brain become fixed. So we believed previously that when you are born like this, as you grow older, that's who you are. That's who you are. But there was a time which you called a decade of advancement in brain science, which was around the 1990s to probably 2000 or 2010. Around that time, there's a lot that we learned, which changed completely how we perceive things and understand brain. We also thought that the brain structure is relatively immutable after a critical period during early childhood. So whatever you are after so many years of childhood, we thought that's who you were going to be, and that was the end. We know now that it's actually not true. So that decade of science taught us that we are what we repeatedly do, okay? As a man thinks within himself, so is he. So what you do all the time makes you to be who you are now. So the brain structure, this is a very simplified picture of a brain, just to show you the three key components of the brain. We've got the part of the brain, which is the cortex, that deals with thinking, logic, what to do, your evaluation, decision making. And then you've got another part called hippocampus, which regulates your memory and emotions. And then you've got another part, which is the one, we call it the survival part. It turns on fight and flight, and it stores memories of events. So any experience that you go through, remember those neurons have to form synapses to make sense of that experience, either by responding to that experience. So the neurons in the different parts of the brain get strengthened. So in someone, for instance, who's, I think the previous speaker mentioned, someone who's depressed, okay, this person doesn't think properly, they can't make decisions, it means that the part of the brain that deals with thinking and decision making becomes affected, okay? So in someone, for instance, and also the part that deals with memory and emotions, because they're always down, they're not happy, so different parts of the brain get affected by different experiences. So these connections, as you can see, there are millions of these connections in the brain, millions of them. They happen every single moment. And these connections, we now know that they happen throughout life. And they are formed and strengthened or weakened or deleted by experiences. Okay? So as you are sitting here, your previous years or your entire life, the experiences have deleted some of these synapses. Okay? Your experience have strengthened some of these synapses, and your experience have reinforced certain synapses. Okay? So let's look a little bit about brain development. Neurons develop very rapidly before birth. Remember, when a child is born, they have arms, they have brain, they have eyes, they have everything. So there is some development of a brain that happens before they are born. And that development happens very rapidly. And that is why it's very, very important when a woman is pregnant to really be careful and aware and mind what they do, because everything that you do impacts on the baby that is in your womb. The things that you do become experiences for that baby, okay? So at birth, the child is born with a whole lot of these cells. We call them neurons. Most of them are already present. However, the connections and the wiring is the one that is not complete when a child is born. These still have to be built after birth. So from birth to about 8 months, we know that there's a lot of these connections that happen. Remember, when a child is born, they haven't had that many experiences. And when they are born, in the first 8 months, everything you do to that child determines what synapses occur in the brain of that child. And we also know that in the first 3 years of life, it's a period of rapid synapse formation that connects nerve cells into functioning circuits. So if this child is going to be, for instance, a hostile child who's short-tempered, the experiences that the child is exposed to that create connections that gives that personality. Are we together? Yes. So the first 3 years is a critical period in brain development, and it is during this critical period where the enriched environments can have the greatest effect on brain development. So for those of you who have little children, just remember, early years of life shape a child for life, okay? It shapes a child really for how well this person can cope and what synapses are formed, what is strengthened in this child. It's very, very critical, even though we know that later in life, there are things you can do to rewire and reshape. So it is an opportunity where right experiences and early childhood programs can help these children build better lives. So you've got to give a child the right experiences so that they form the right synapses, okay? And also, more importantly, for emotional and intellectual growth, we know that it is very critical in those years than we used to know before. So we need to learn how to make a difference in the mind of a child. So the Bible says, the mind set on the spirit is life and peace. And I am saying the young mind that is set on the spirit, it's life and peace. I'm just re-emphasizing that it's possible to do that with a child as well. So I'll speak about the concept of neuroplasticity, which is probably a repetition of what the previous speaker had said. Research has shown us that many aspects of the brain are very plastic, like they change in adulthood. So the brain never stops changing through learning and experiences. Now, when we talk about change, we're talking about structural changes, okay? So if you do a scan on me now, and I go through a specific experience, be it traumatic, but a very intense experience, and you repeat a scan on me, that scan will look different. So the changes are physical and structural. And because they are physical and structural, they translate into functional changes. So how I will operate, how I will work, and the things I will do also begin to change. So we're able to rewire those circuits, and those happen as a result of experiences and training, and sometimes as a response to injury. So can you see these things? These are connections. This is where the neurons connect. And those are the things that you change. So the brain has got different neurons, different parts of the brain. Those neurons will connect, but in terms of which neurons connect with which neurons, what types of synapses happen, it's determined by the experience of the time and which part of the brain is stimulated at the time. So neuroplasticity, we can define it as a lifelong ability of the brain to reorganize neural pathways. Can you hear that? It reorganizes them. Or to change its functional organization as a result of a new experience. So if, for instance, a child grows up in a family and mom and dad decide to separate, it's a huge experience for that child. And a lot of changes, physical changes, occur in the brain of that child because of that experience. If someone grows in an environment where there is someone who's an alcoholic, who drinks a lot, the interaction, how they speak, the shouting, the fighting, it changes the physical structure of the brain. And you are then attuned to exist in that kind of environment. So everything, your being, how you relate with life, how you speak, how you do things, is shaped by the experiences that we're exposed to over time. So sometimes those changes, they happen to protect us so that we can cope. So, and when an area of your brain as well is damaged or becomes non-functional, other areas may take over some of those functions. I'm sure you've seen if somebody gets a stroke and they are not able to walk properly, okay, it means a specific area in the brain has been damaged. You'll see the physiotherapist will be coming, teaching you how to walk, holding the person by the arm, training them. That experience of trying to learn how to walk creates different synapses in the brain. Gradually, over time, you form new synapses that actually tell the leg that you can walk. This is how you walk. It reteaches the body how to do something that the body thought it would no longer do. Are we together? It re-educates the body. So, as we said, neuroplasticity occurs before birth. It can happen in brain injury, as we said, where it has to compensate for lost functions or maximize on remaining functions. One of the examples that they give is that they looked at, if you have 5 fingers, if you lose one of the, remember each finger is represented digitally in the brain. If you lose one finger, that part of the brain doesn't work. But they say that can train your brain. It means that part that doesn't work, you start stimulating the surrounding neurons to actually compensate for that area. And gradually that finger may begin to work if it doesn't work, because the surrounding area of the brain is stimulated to compensate for that part that doesn't work. So also, it happens in adulthood. Whenever something new needs to be learned or memorized, you then teach yourself those, you rewire yourself in a way that teaches you something new. So what plays a significant role in plasticity? Yes, we know there are some genetic factors, but more importantly, it's the environment where you live, which determines your experiences and actions of that person, the behavior. How we behave changes how our brain is. I'll give an example. If I am in a tertiary institution and I decide, I'm just going to explore what's going on, okay? I go to a party, that is an experience. And the brain sees that as an experience. And the more I go to these parties, the more the physical structure of the brain changes to accommodate this new me. Are we together? It accommodates this new me and makes life better for me with this new experience that I'm having. So the experiences that we have, we must think very carefully because they are the ones who shape who we are. So I said here, set your mind on the things above, not on the things that are on earth. So if you consciously and continuously make yourself experience things of God, your mind changes physically to see God differently. So the meaning of God becomes differently when you read the Bible regularly. The meaning of God changes when you pray all the time, because you stimulate in your brain those synapses that say, this is a good God. You stimulate those synapses that allows you to look at God differently. Okay, that is why a Christian life that has no prayer, a Christian life that has a Christian who doesn't read the Bible, a Christian who doesn't interact with other Christians, the areas of the brain that are stimulated are those that do not value God. So you continue with the life that values the things that you experience or expose yourself to. So examples of a brain change, as it was said previously, it's a brain of people that speak more than one language. It's said that there is a part of the brain that gets bigger because remember, these are stimulated. If I speak English now, there's a part of the brain that I use for that particular language. If I change to my language and speak Zulu, there's a part. So people who speak a lot of languages simultaneously, that part of the brain is enlarged compared to someone who only knows one language. It's also said in musicians, because there is a part that really that is stimulated by music, their gray matter volume it's the highest for professional musicians, and for the amateur it's bigger than ours probably, but not as much. So the more you do something, the brain adapts itself to that. There's also a study that was done where they looked at medical students. They looked at them just before exams and they looked at them after exams. So they looked at them 3 months before exams, and then the students went, they studied, they didn't sleep, and they noticed changes when they did a scan, and those were learning-induced changes, physically. That's what we're saying, that there are some physical changes that happen. We're not just talking emotions, but we're talking physical changes. There's another one as well, a very known example of London taxi drivers, where they did a study, and they looked at the taxi drivers in London, you know, the ones that drive the cabs. Remember, for you to get a license in London, you need to know the map of London, in and out. You need to memorize it. When they say GP Street, you must know exactly where it is. When they say Solomon Mahlangu Street, you must know where it is. When they say the civic, so part of what they need to have to get a license is to memorize the whole map of London. And they found that taxi drivers, depending on how long they've been taxi drivers, there is a certain part in the brain called the hippocampus, which is very, 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 very much larger than the population. It's also much larger for the bus drivers, because the bus drivers do not necessarily have to memorize much. That shows you that whatever you do consistently makes you who you are, and you become that. So how does the brain know which connections to keep and which connections not to keep? Firstly, the connections used repeatedly are strengthened. Those that are not used, eventually they don't survive, they die. They are deleted, that's the word we use. So if you don't speak, for instance, if a child is born and you don't speak to that child at all, that child will not master language skills later on, because when you speak to a child, you stimulate that certain things in the mind, you strengthen certain synapses, and that gives that child an advantage around those things. If you don't play with the child, that child will have problems when they have to adjust socially. So the brain also constructs a perception about God. Let's not fool ourselves. How I see God is different from how you see God because of the experiences that I go through. If I nurture experiences that elevate God, I'm going to see God in a different light altogether. But if I elevate experiences that do not reinforce the divine or the holiness around God, then I will not see God in that way. So we see God in uniquely different ways, and because of that, we give God different qualities and meaning and value. How you value God at the moment is determined by how much time you spend on the things of God. Because when you spend time on the things of God, it also translates into changes in your brain that actually are receptive to that, to those experiences. So let's come now to emotional health. Now that you've got this background understanding of how the brain works and what changes happen, I'm now going to zoom in and allow us to speak about emotional health, emotional trauma, and emotional healing. So how we see ourselves, how we look at others, our attitude, self-talk, what I say about myself, influences my ability to create positive connections in the brain. So, if I'm always negative about myself, if I always see bad things in people, those things strengthen certain connections in the brain. But if I do positive things, on the other hand, it also creates positive connections in the brain. So there is a relationship between physical and emotional well-being. And when we say physical, we're not talking about headache only or a pain in the stomach. We're also talking about the physical nature of your own brain. There is a relationship between how it looks like and your emotional well-being. So how do we define emotional trauma? It's very difficult, but it's a very unpleasant state of mind. The tears may be visible or they may not, okay? We know there are a lot of people who experience tearful lives without really physically you seeing them crying. So over time, we have understood emotional trauma better as we understood how the brain functions. For instance, previously, emotional trauma was only described in the context of a war. So those men who went to war, who came back, who've seen people dying, it was the context within which we described emotional trauma, because the trauma had to be this big and visible and also tangible. We also thought those who have experienced gender-based violence, like rape, were the only ones who actually would have experienced emotional trauma. But we know now that emotional trauma can come from surviving a car accident, it can come from breaking up from a significant relationship. As I said, a child who comes from a family that has separated, or if you've gone through separation yourself, be it through divorce or whatever manner, that causes significant emotional trauma. Or it can be a humiliating experience, an experience that you really don't wish anybody should know about it, or you just don't wish to go through that experience. Or it can be a life-threatening illness. If today you are diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, that causes a very, very uncomfortable and severe trauma. What we know as well is that usually emotional trauma, it's something that is unexpected, and we are completely unprepared for it, completely unprepared for it. Even if you can see that it looks like I'm going to lose my job, they are retrenching, you may have been aware in a way or so, but it's still traumatic if you are unprepared for it. Now, there's a difference between stress and trauma, okay? Stress is short-lived. If at work I have a deadline that I have to meet, and there are things that I need to do by a certain time, between now and that certain time, I'll be very stressed. Are we together? It will be stress. I won't be sleeping properly. I'll be thinking about the email I didn't send. I'll be thinking about this and that. However, at some point, it goes away, because it's stress. Trauma, on the other hand, has got long-lasting residual effects in life. So even after the experience has passed, you continue to live with the impact of that trauma. You continue to live with the impact of that trauma. And the events cause very, very, very serious emotional toll on people. It kills your confidence. It changes how you look at life. It changes how you think about anything. In some people, it even changes how they think about church because of that emotional trauma. However, the event itself generally does not determine the trauma. It is the individual experience of the event that makes it traumatic. So if we go through the same event, I, as an individual, how I experience this event and how I deal with it is the one that will determine whether this event really is a traumatic event and causes emotional trauma, or I may be equipped enough and having my neurons and synapses at the right places to be able to cope with it differently. Are we together? So the emotional trauma in most cases may not necessarily be predictable. So what happens when you go through this trauma? The connections in the brain are changed. This is something that we never speak about. So if someone is going through a very serious life experience, let's remember that certain things in the brain change as well. There is overstimulation of certain parts of the brain. We call it the survival brain. You know, there is also an understimulation, or certain parts of the brain become underactive. So you are not able to make the necessary connections in those areas. One instance would be your memory, the memory part of the brain. So people that have been through an emotionally traumatizing experience, they are forgetful, they can't make decisions, they think about something for 2 days without making a decision, something that ordinarily it should take you 10 minutes to make a decision about. They're not interested in things that they used to do. They don't want to interact with people. So all those things come as a result because certain connections in the brain are not happening, and other connections of the brain are actually happening. So the signs, for instance, we should remember that sometimes these negative changes can occur instantly. For instance, if someone dies today, you may experience these things the following day. It doesn't always happen that the event or the experience has to happen over a period of 6 months. And what is important is you need to ask yourself, are you able to communicate what is stressing you? Are you able to respond adequately to what is happening at the moment? Can you return to normal after the event, or are you just frozen in that emotional state? And the answers to these will tell you if it's just a stress or if it's an emotional trauma that warrants a much more significant and in-depth response to be able to get over it. So trauma that happens very early in life. So if, for instance, I expose my children to traumatic experiences, and we do without knowing it, we do. If you expose your child to that, you must know that that child will be very vulnerable in terms of experiencing future trauma events. So how they will deal with traumatic experiences, it's going to be very different because they have stored in their minds, they've got those centers or those synapses of negativity that they have stored. So how does it happen? As we said, it changes the structure and function of the brain, especially where the frontal part meets the stem. And we see those changes as well in those with learning problems as well as those with a post-traumatic stress disorder. So what are the symptoms of emotional trauma? You've got disturbances in eating. A person may not be eating well, or they may be overeating. They may not be sleeping appropriately. Sometimes they don't sleep at all. Or they sleep the whole night, the whole day, the whole night, and the whole day of the next day. Okay? They just don't have interest in life. They've got low energy. And sometimes they have pain that is unexplained. You know, all of a sudden you've got this pain at the back from nowhere. And they're anxious. They may also experience depression. Okay? And there is that sense of fearfulness. they're just scared and afraid. And that fearfulness ranges, from here to there. It can be a fear of going to school because you're going to fail. It can be a fear of exams. It can be just that constant state of fear of losing a spouse, It can be a fear of people laughing at you. So they are just constantly in fear from that emotional trauma. And they feel out of control. They know that they are not having things together. And sometimes then they withdraw completely and they walk around with that guilt. They walk around with that guilt. If, for instance, someone loses a child as a result of death, they walk around with that guilt that I should have done this. Maybe if I didn't, maybe if I stayed at home and didn't work, the child will, this would not have happened. So you walk around with that guilt. Or maybe if I was thinner, my husband would not have left. There is that constant guilt that you walk around with. And they have memory lapses. Because remember, as we said, anything that you experience interferes with a specific part of the brain. So we know that that part of the brain that deals with memory is hugely affected with those experiences. So they forget easily and they can't concentrate. But the big thing is those are people who struggle to make decisions. And as I said, if they have been exposed to that as children, they take that into their adult life. You find these adults who just cannot make a decision. It takes them 5 days to decide, are you going to the health convention or not? They just cannot make a decision, But someone else will take the diary, check, I'm free. Yes, I'm going. These ones, 3 months later, they still don't know whether they are going or not. So the effects of emotional trauma, it varies. But one of the effects that it's very prominent, it's hostility. People who've been traumatized emotionally are very aggressive. And that aggression surfaces in different places and different areas. And it's sometimes not directed to the right person. Have you seen mothers who are so aggressive towards their children? Have you seen them? She comes back from work, the child is running, hi, mommy, hey, and you wonder, what happened? And those are signs of emotional trauma. Those may be signs of emotional trauma, where you have toxic relationship with your children, but you can't explain it. You are this person who's just hostile and angry and shouting and throwing things at people. And they have serious arguments in the family. Have you heard in some families where, I don't even, I wanted to phone her, but when I think about the fact that she's going to be shouting on the phone, I decided, maybe let me do it tomorrow. Have you heard such things? Or a colleague at work who's just arguing with everyone, fighting everyone. Those are signs of emotional trauma. And when they happen, it's because over time, you have strengthened certain synapses in your brain that then nurture that kind of personality. Okay? You've strengthened that. There are people who just calm naturally. They are happy, they are calm, they are content, and by so doing, they also continuously nurture certain connections in the brain that keep them calm. And also people that have been traumatized, they just can't maintain close relationships. They can't. So they have friends, but they don't have friends. They don't want to be too close to people because I want to buy a sheba, they have this thing about people. And also sometimes they can experience that social withdrawal as a result of that emotional trauma. How do we then heal? This weekend we're talking about the brain, and we are saying the brain changes that happen as a result of emotional trauma can be reversed. they can be reversed. And let's remember, everything starts with the Bible and ends with the Bible. Jeremiah 17, verse 14, it says, "Heal me, O Lord, and I will be healed. Save me, and I will be saved, for you are my praise." Now, if the Bible says, love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, the Bible is saying, have an experience with God. And it is that experience that causes the physical change in your brain. Okay? And that physical change will result in healing. Are we together? Fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. That is Hebrews 12, verse 2. So all that we're emphasizing is that if you can make sure that what we talk about, it's because we are trying to achieve these two things. Are we together? So we are not just doing these actions out of context. We should remember that the healing comes from God. And if the healing comes from God, what are then things that I need to do that will change my experiences to help me make different connections, strengthen different connections, delete some of the connections that have accumulated over time? If we cast all our worries on him because he cares, certainly change is bound to happen. So how do we change? Can you see this picture? We are saying rewire your brain. Rewire your brain. And unfortunately, change becomes limited to where the brain is in a mood for it. So in other words, if I decide I'm going to change, if I decide, okay, for instance, you saw the previous presentation where they spoke about diet, and the importance of diet and health in relation to your brain. If I decide today, you know what, I'm going to be a different person. I'm going to change my diet, I'm going to start exercising, but I just say it. For that decision to translate into my brain making major changes, I also have to act differently. So you've got to be alert around that decision. Don't disengage. Don't say, I'm going to exercise and then sit down. If I say I'm going to exercise, I go to the shop, I buy running shoes, I get socks, I get my gymming clothes, I set my alarm. Do you understand what I mean? The brain will rewire to help you to go and exercise. But if I say I want to change my lifestyle, I go and buy all these chips and all the things, and I lie on the couch, and you ask me, how was the convention? No, I've made a decision, I'm going to exercise. Is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? So we're saying change is limited to where the brain is in a mood for it. So you've got to create that mood for the brain so that real change happens. When we disengage on a particular decision, your neuroplastic ability to make that specific change is switched off in your brain. Are we together? So, and when I'm talking about disengaging, I'm talking about not doing anything about something you want to do something about. Did I say it right? Yeah. So, for us to change, we have to rewire our brain. We must remember, we need to stay alert and we need to stay engaged on that decision. You need to try harder. So when I say try harder, I mean do things that are pointing towards the change you're looking for. You must, because the harder you try, the more motivated you become and the more alert you are, and the better the potential outcome that you're looking for, and the bigger the brain change. Okay? Everything ultimately results in a brain change. And when your brain changes, it makes you who you are. You become who you are. So sometimes we make decisions, but we then, after making a decision, act in a way that makes a different change in our brain. And we wonder why things don't happen. Okay? Because how your brain changes determines then who you will become and decisions that will come naturally. If you are intensely focused and trying to master something, the change that you are going to experience is going to be even greater. Now, I don't know what happened. Okay. So, and as we think about this change, especially in terms of emotional healing, we should remember Romans 12, verse 2, which says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Now, what I'm saying is, when it comes to emotional healing, be aware that there are a lot of things that are offered for emotional healing, but you should choose the ones that will make you transformed instead of conforming to this world. Are we together? So there are things that the world will offer as a way of relief for your emotional trauma. But I'm saying you should not be conformed to this world as you try to heal emotionally. So you need to connect certain neurons and engage them together moment by moment. And I'll explain that in my later slides. The strength of these connections are the ones that cause the actual change in the brain. And the more something is practiced, the more connections are changed. Okay? So these include all elements of experiences. Now, what we're saying is, you will not change unless you know what you want to change to. Okay? So you must have the ability to identify where you are and say, this is the event that happened, this is where I am, and this is where I want to go. And as you do that and identify activities that will take you there, remember, you are then creating connections in your brain that would facilitate and sustain actions in that direction. So initially what happens, for instance, if you decide, I really want to be happy, I'm really tired of being unhappy, you know, I really want to reconnect with friends, I really want to read my Bible more, I really want to start praying, you know, I only pray so many times a week, but I really want to make sure that every morning I pray. So the first morning when you wake up and pray, the brain registers that, okay? But it's going to be temporary because the brain is also watching. It's going to be temporary. So the brain first records the change, and then it decides if it should make it permanent or not. It waits for you. Repeated exposure strengthens those connections. Are we together? To a point where when you've woken up and go if you wake up and go to work without praying, the brain tells you there's something wrong today. Okay? Because the connections have already been made. So the brain has already defined you as a prayerful woman who prays every morning at 4. Okay? Because you've made those connections and changes in the brain that define you in that way. So every learning, it's an opportunity for the brain to stabilize. And also, when you begin to do that, remember, when you are emotionally traumatized, there are a lot of these connections, we call them noise and disruptive noises that are happening, okay? The connections that make you sleep, that make you lazy, those are noisy connections which are unwanted. So when you learn new things, you then reduce and begin to delete those negative connections that make you do things that are not warranted. So each time your brain strengthens a connection to advance a certain skill, it weakens other connections that are not used. So it's not possible to do certain things at the same time. If you fix yourself on this one, you begin to stop doing certain things and those connections become weaker. So this negative plastic brain change erases some of irrelevant activities in the brain. Are we together? So there is what we call sprouting of, these neurons. They are able to create more of itself that is able to make more connections. So if, for instance, this part of the brain, because you were not using it optimally, the connections have weakened, okay? So there are very few. When you begin to do things correctly, then it actually increases. You get more connections around that. And there can be more dendrites that are sprouting so that they can be able to make more connections. It's physical. Can you see? Very, very physical. So what to do to heal emotionally? Firstly, you need to identify the beliefs that support your intention. So if you want to change, what is it? What are the beliefs, fundamental beliefs, that are going to support the change that you want? Okay? Is it reading the Bible? Is it putting together a set of values? But you need to have certain things that would guide that intention. And then secondly, you must embrace positive emotions, okay? Without emotion, a thought is neutral and it doesn't have power. So I'll give an example. If, for instance, I'm thinking, hey, I'm tired of being miserable. Maybe you've been really going through a patch in your marriage and you're just tired of this life and you want something different. You cannot say, I want to be happy, but then you are crying at the same time. Okay? Or say, I want to be happy, but stay on a sofa and keep quiet and not talk to anyone. Are we together? You've got to embrace positive emotions that are aligned to the decision that you've taken, and actively so. And if, for instance, I've decided I don't want this life, I want to be happy, start laughing, start playing with the children. Are we together? When you play with your children, it's an experience in your brain. It registers as an experience. Now you are being happy. Now you are doing this. Your brain begins to make certain connections and neurons in your brain that reinforce that kind of experience. And also, you must visualize what you want. The brain, if I'm imagining something, it doesn't really know whether it's real or not, but it knows that there is a thought that you really fiddling with in your mind. So if you rehearse that and do it over and over and over again, then you've got to rehearse your new habits, and that will strengthen your ability to create them in your life. Because when you think about the good things all the time, your connections and your connectivity in the brain becomes positive. And it then lays a platform for you to be able to do it later. Negative thoughts breed negative actions. Positive thoughts breed positive actions. So if you want to change your diet, start thinking about carrots and strawberries and, this lunch that I'm going to do tomorrow, I'm going to have a vegetable and a salad lunch. Think about it, literally. That's how easy it is. And the more you think about it, the more it becomes real. Now, the problem is that we feed our thoughts and minds with negative things but expect something else. So you say something, but then in your thought, you are thinking, fish and chips. You are thinking, lunch. Do you know that steak from that whatever? But you've made a decision to be vegetarian. But you are thinking about, so here you've got to begin to visualize your decision. And you are saying, in practical terms, medically, what you think actually determines the connections you make in your brain. And with time, you will be that person that you think about. You must take actions that support your intention. If, as a family, you've been through really a difficult patch and you've decided we're going to do things right, take actions that are going to support that intention. Because remember, as children in the family, as the mother, as the father, up until that point, you have created connections in your brain that are negative, that have been supporting this negative environment, this hostile environment. So when you make a decision, you've got to begin to make experiences that are going to delete those negative things and create positive things. Are we together? Yes. You must, it has to be practical. So you can't just plan to be right and not have a plan to be right. Are we together? You can't just say, I can't just say to my husband, oh, okay, no, that's fine. Now we're going to change and do things differently. And then we go and sleep and wake up tomorrow and sleep and wake up tomorrow. Have a plan to say, from tomorrow, this is what we're going to do differently, which is positive. In the morning, I'm going to go and greet my children. Wake up and greet your children and hug them. Are we together? In the afternoon, I'm going to make sure that I call my child and tell my child that I love her. Are we together? Yes. So we are saying take those actions that support that positive intention if you want to heal emotionally. And then don't ruminate. You know, rumination is a concept where people just feel negative about everything. They feel sorry for themselves. They feel pity. They think that they are not loved. They think that this world is just so cruel. So it is that reinforcement of negativity about yourself. And we see a lot around people who've gone through an emotional traumatic experience. So they ruminate a lot. So you've got to be very careful about ruminate, because you spend a lot of time thinking about how miserable you are. And you spend a lot of hours in your mind reinforcing negative things. And when someone asks you, you justify it by saying you're trying to solve a problem, but actually you are so negative. You know, I hate my mother-in-law in your mind, but you've made a decision that you want to be a good person. You know, so you can't think about negative things that people are doing to you, which in most cases are not real. It's because of the state of mind you are in. So one of the things that you need to do is to stop ruminating. Feed your mind with positive thoughts. Feed your mind with thoughts that encourage you to love. Feed your mind with thoughts that encourage you to do positive things. If you are in relationships, it's very important to rewire your brain around decisions in terms of your marriage. And then the most important thing is that you must repeat that and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. I wonder how many of you have heard about the fact that if you do something, do they say for 21 days? What do they say? If you do something for 21 days, then it becomes a habit. Do we know where that comes from? It comes from the fact that what we are explaining about neuroplasticity. If I do something today, the brain registers it. It creates connections about that event. It becomes temporary. And then if you do it again tomorrow, the brain thinks, oh, okay. It then strengthens those connections around that experience or that habit. If you do it repeatedly, you physically change the structure of your brain to adapt to that new habit. That's what it's about. So if you do it repeatedly, the reason why after 21 days it becomes a habit, it's because during that time, your brain will have then formed synapses and connections that accommodate that change, and then it then registers in your brain as a habit. And also by doing that, you begin to delete other habits you've had which are in contradiction with what you've just started. Are we together? So it's all about changing the brain and how it functions. So there is this thing about speech. You've got to speak the right things. Gesture and speech, they spring from the same part of the brain during communication. Have we heard something that they call body language? Body language, yeah? So even if I don't say anything, okay, what I think about you, it will show in my body language. At the same time, when you start speaking, okay, when you start speaking and speak the right things all the time, it also changes how you think in terms of what you decide to do. So if, for instance, people who self-talk themselves negatively, they become negative people. But if you speak positively, so speak the right things all the time, say the right things to your children, say the right things to your colleagues, it becomes a habit, and your brain gets used to the fact that you're doing the right things. And eventually, you will be that person. So whether you're sitting or you're standing or you're just listening, the body is always speaking. So let your thoughts be the right thoughts so that your body can actually speak the right thing. So it's important for us that you change your mind by changing your perception, okay, how you look at things, and you've got to decide exactly how you're going to do that. And when you've decided, you've got to make actions that support that decision. And at the center of all these things, it's a prayerful life. Because a prayerful life is able to train our brain differently. It's able to train our brain in the way that God wants us to live. And when the brain begins to be trained in that manner, it makes the right connections and it facilitates healing. So part of the reason why healing sometimes is difficult is because we are strengthening the wrong connections. And we are reinforcing the wrong experiences. And we are not speaking the right things. And we are creating an environment that does not allow our brain to change in the right direction. So I'm going to end there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Msimang, for a very, very informative presentation. What do you say? Wow, that was good. Is there any burning question? Any burning question? There is a hand. If we can just get a microphone to the hand.
There's no volume.
Right, while we sort that out, let me just do a listening exercise with you. All right, I've got 3 books that I would like to share with you. Number 1, Can Attitude Affect Your Health? No, that's not the question, that's the title of the book. The next one, Overcoming the 3 Ds, Depression, Discouragement, Despair. No answer, please. It's the title of the book. The third one, Juice Your Way to Fabulous Health. Wow, that sounds good. The questions are, how does eating and sleeping affect, or how is eating and sleeping affected by emotional trauma? Let me see, which table shall we do? Yes, the table there. Yeah, that's right. Um, Excellent. Thank you very much. That was good. Next question. True or false? The brain cannot be rewired. The brain can... No. Hold on. I will come to your table. The brain cannot be rewired. The table there. Vanessa, your table. Right? Somebody can answer. The first hand that I see. True or false? The brain cannot be rewired. False. All right. Next one. It's not just one. That's too easy. Another one. True or false? Same person. Repeated exposure strengthens the neurons. Repeated exposure strengthens the neurons.
Connectivity.
True. All right. You can come and collect your gift later. And the last question. According to Romans 12:2, how do we change? According to Romans 12:2, how do we change? Here's this table. By the renewing of our mind. Beautiful. Right. Can we entertain that question at the back?
Thank you very much for the powerful presentation on emotional health. I have two questions here. My first question is going to be about that our experiences, our childhood experiences, they affect how we behave, how we believe in ourselves. They affect our emotions, and finally, they affect how we relate to other people. And they also affect issues. They have impact in issues of safety and security, issues of dependability, issues of entitlement. So I believe that prayer and studying the Bible can assist in facilitating healing. So I want you to talk more about what's the role of therapy here, especially cognitive behavior therapy, in facilitating healing. And then my second question is also, it's about trauma, emotional trauma. Can you put all these emotions in one basket in terms of, if I witness my husband being shot at and he dies, and a person who actually nurses her husband until he dies, can the same emotions be under emotional trauma, or can we say this is just too stressful, like a relationship that has been broken? Can we put all these emotions in one basket? Or we can separate them, that if you nurse your husband until death, then a person who actually received tragic news that the husband has been shot, can they be in the same category of emotions? Ngiyabonga.
Yeah, I can answer them now. Yeah, okay. I think the first question you asked regarding a cognitive therapy, we will talk about that when we have our workshop later, if you don't mind. And then the second one about sudden death and kind of expected death from an illness. Remember when we spoke about emotional trauma, we said that it is not necessarily the event that determines whether an experience is traumatic or not. It's how the individual experiences that event that determines. So some people have wired themselves in a way that makes it easy for them to cope with these things. Some people have not. So individually, we will respond differently to the very same two events that you're talking about. It's like failing an exam. Someone may commit suicide. Someone may just decide to go and party the whole week. Someone may just sit down, gather themselves, and say, I'm going for it again. So yeah, it varies. It depends on how the individuals are able to cope with that particular experience.